All right, this is Chris Guido with the Still Life Stories, and I am here for a special treat for all of you who have never, who know very little about tequila or bacanora or mezcal. We're going to have a special lesson tonight on bacanora, and I have Emmanuel Camici with Estaca Bacanora, and it's one of the few really great brands that are available in the United States. So we're going to go through a lesson on this. We're going to do a tasting, and you're going to meet a really unique special guy who's one of the few master sommeliers in the entire country. So let's get started.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on your program, Chris. I'm Emmanuel Camigi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Estaca. Estaca is a producer of a very unique agave called Bacanora, something that most of us have never heard about. We're familiar with tequila, we're familiar with mezcal, but Bacanora is the agave spirit that is made in one of the most northernmost parts of Mexico, Sonora, that state that's just south of the border of Arizona. It's been around for 400 years. So how come we've never heard of this stuff? And that's mostly because from 1915 to 1992, it was illegal. And in fact, if you were caught making it in the Sierra Madre mountains of Sonora, you could be shot or hanged in the early days. The reason being was a very righteous and conservative and pious governor of Sonora, General Calles, decreed in 1915 that drinking Bacanora gave you immoral and hedonistic thoughts. So, fast forward to 1992 when it finally, after 77 years, becomes legal. And in 2000, the Mexican government gives it this appellation, Bacanora. Bacanora is the name of a little town in the Sierra Madre Mountains where in 1627, a Jesuit priest taught the indigenous people how to distill. So exactly what is Bacanora? How is this agave spirit different from the more familiar tequila mezcal? Well, I think there's three main differences. First of all, Bacanora can only be made in Sonora in northern Mexico. Tequila, which comes from the central part, mostly centered around the state of Jalisco, where the town of Tequila is located. But tequila can also be made from 4 other states apart from Jalisco. And then in the southern part and southwestern part of Mexico, you have 10 states that can legally label their agave spirit mezcal. Most of it comes from Oaxaca, 80%. So location is the first difference. The second difference is the type of agave. And every agave has its own unique character. In tequila, you only use Blue Weber agave. In Bacanora, we'll also use only a single varietal of agave, Agave Pacifica, which is indigenous to the Sonoran Desert. And mezcal can be made of up to 40 different kinds of agave, although 80% of the production comes from Espadín. And most of mezcal is produced in the state of Oaxaca. And a year and a half ago, we introduced the first of the Bacanoras that we produced ourselves into the United States. About 8 months later, we produced another version, and a few months ago, we came out with 3 new versions of that Bacanora.
All right, well, I see 5 bottles in front of me, all different colors. I want to try it. All right, so what are we tasting here?
The first one we're going to try, which is the first one that came into the country about a year and a half ago, is our Blanco. This is a style of Blanco that every Bacanora producer makes. It's about 40% alcohol. Ours is unique in that it's all made from organically grown agave.
It smells very fresh and grassy.
Thank you.
It's really elegant. I mean, I've had a lot of tequila that just wants to kick you between the eyes with a donkey hoof. But this is just really elegant. This is something you can sip and savor. You know, to me, this is like a good scotch in the tequila world.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, this is very tasty.
Well, what you just tasted was our Blanco, which is typical of every producer in Bacanora. Ours is organically grown agave and 8-year-old agave plants rather than 5 to 6. I like plants that are a little older because they're fruitier, less herbal, less herbaceous. It's about 40%, and it's about 40% alcohol.
All right, so what do we have here?
This next one is really interesting to taste after the one you've just had because everything is the same except for one thing. So it's the same Agave Pacifica plant because in Bacanora you can only make it from Agave Pacifica. It's the same method of cooking. It spends about 44 hours the agaves being cooked. Same alcohol, 40%. But this is made from wild foraged agave.
Oh, interesting. So this is feral.
Exactly. Well, and we say...
All right. This reminds me of sitting on the porch in Terlingua at the store, looking out the sunset over the mountains. There's just a flavor here that just reminds me of Big Bend. And I spent a lot of time out there on my motorcycle, and it's a fabulous place. And there's just a little piece of magic here that reminds me of the desert. Wow. And I hate to say it's smooth, but it really is. I mean, I've had a lot of cask strength whiskeys all over the planet that just don't have the elegance of this, you know, at that level. I mean, this is spectacular. All right. Even if you're not a West Texas desert fan and you've never spent any time out there in the desert, you got to taste this because this is a unique flavor that's worth the hunt. It's worth finding this wherever you can. Go find this and taste it because it's fabulous. That's wonderful. That's breakfast, lunch, and dessert all in one glass.
And these agaves weigh 10 to 15 pounds versus the organically farmed agaves that weigh 50 to 80 pounds. So that means we have to harvest 5 times as many agaves to make the same amount of liquid. And you got to go out and get those agaves, not walk down to your plantation.
And carry them back with you.
And carry them back with me.
Wow. That's got to be brutal.
We call this, typically when in mezcal where you find wild agave, they call those silvestre, and you'll see that name on a label. That means wild or untamed in Spanish. But we sweat so much to make this that I wanted a stronger name. So instead of silvestre, I call it salvaje, which means savage in Spanish.
I totally get that. No, that's really fabulous. And the flavor is just more intense, and there's a lot more profile going on there. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff going on in every sip.
I also find that at the very tail end, there's this like this flavor, this strength in the flavor that for me is telling me I'm still wild. You haven't tamed me all the way.
Yeah, yeah. That's a Firo Bacanora. I love that.
So next we have a still strength. This is something that you don't find in Sonora, and a few producers are now doing still strength in tequila. What still strength means is that we bottle it directly from the still, so it's not diluted with water down to 40% alcohol. So this is at 50% alcohol, which is exactly as it comes out from the still.
So it's 100 proof.
It's 100 proof, exactly. Yeah. And we call this coraje, which means courage. Courage to drink it, or the courage of the man who made it when it was illegal. Because without those men, Bacanora would be a forgotten tale.
Yeah. All right. This is the Courage Bacanora. It's 100 proof. This is, in Scotland, we call this barrel strength. So this is 50% ABV. It smells like the desert. You know what's interesting? It's intense, but it doesn't burn. There's no burn at all.
Yeah.
It's a really intense flavor, but it's elegant. It's. I hate using the word smooth when talking about tasting spirits, because to me, smooth means somebody burned all the flavor out of it, and it's just, there's nothing there. There's nobody home. But it's elegant, it's loaded with flavor, but you still know that it's carrying a punch with it. It's really good. It's very fruity. It's very wild. Man, it's hard to describe that flavor. The flavor profile. I'm so used to whiskey flavor profiles, and I've got all those cliches. There aren't cliches that fit this very well.
Right.
But this is really interesting. I really like this, and this is something that, you know, my old joke is whiskey is for stories and tequila is for jail. This is with Bacanora, with a good Bacanora, that's for stories too, because this is something you could sit, watch a great sunset with good friends, sit around a campfire, and tell stories.
Yeah.
There's stories in here. I smell stories. This is good stuff.
So this next bottling is very special. It's very special for a few reasons. The simple description is this is the still strength version of the wild, of Salvaje. And 98 proof, but it's much more complicated than that. When I went to the town of Bacanora to visit it, I met one of the old timers that had made Bacanora when it was illegal. And I was interested in talking to them and finding out how it was during that era. And his name was Don Guillermo. And we're talking about how Bacanora used to be made back in the day. And he said, well, obviously we would only use wild agave because you couldn't plant a plantation of agave when it was illegal. And we would distill it, and it would go straight into these big glass jugs called demijohns. And then we would cap them, seal them, and bury them underground to hide them from the police.
I love that.
And on special occasions, when somebody had a baby girl, we would bury one the year of her birth, and then we would unearth it for her quinceañera, her 15th birthday, which in Latin culture is a very significant event for a woman, right, or a young lady. And that Bacanora, he said, was amazing. And I'm looking at him But Don Guillermo, Bacanora doesn't change once you put it in glass, because we've all been taught that once you put a distillate in glass, it stops evolving.
It stops aging, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So you buy a bottle of gin or vodka, scotch today, and you keep it for 10 years, it tastes exactly the same.
Right.
And he looks at me and starts wagging his finger. No, Bacanora becomes a lot better. Well, my mother taught me it was very bad manners to argue with an 85-year-old man that had been making Bacanora illegally for 70 years.
Yeah, he's tough.
So I acquiesced.
you.
I acquiesced and said, I'm sure you're right, Don Guillermo. But the next day, I'm back at our distillery and talking to our master distiller. And I said, look, I want to make a lot like they used to make Bacanora when it was illegal. And he looks at me, you're crazy. I said, I know, but I still want to make it. And so I want to buy 80 demijohns. I want to use only wild agave. And I want it straight from the still right into those demijohns. And I want to bury them 6 feet deep. And he's looking at me, oh my God, you know the work that's going to take? I said, I know, but... And it's funny, 3 months later, I come back. We buried it in August 8th of 2024. 3 months later, I come back to the distillery to check up on things in November. And he says, our master says, why don't we try some of that crazy stuff you had me bury, and that we spent 1 week digging a trench to bury all these 80 demijohns in. And I looked at him and I said, look, chances are this is an old wives' tale. And if for some reason that we don't understand, Bacanora evolves in glass when it's buried, then it's only been there for 3 months. How much could it have possibly changed in 3 months? And he looks at me, well, I also buried some half bottles at the same time, because I knew you were going to make me pull them up every once in a while to see how they were evolving. And rather than digging out this huge 5-gallon type jug from the ground, 6 feet under, I buried some half bottles. I said, okay, fine. Take out one of those half bottles. And he said, I also distilled some wild yesterday, and it's at still strength, so I haven't diluted it at all with water. I said, okay, well, have your assistant, Isaac, pour us some, blind, so we don't know which is which. And we both sit in the lab, and we're both, I know we're both thinking the same thing. There's going to be no difference. And lo and behold, the old man was right. The stuff that had been buried was already showing more depth, more complexity, more layered. And so this spent 1 year and 1 day, because I wanted to say it, spent at least a year buried. Yeah. We unearthed it August 9th of 2025. Of the 80 jugs that we buried, we unearthed 34, because I want to see how the rest evolved with time, and ended up bottling 960 bottles. Now, this is called El Trago. El Trago means the shot in Spanish. So you go to a bar and you say to the bartender, dame un trago de tequila, un trago de whiskey. Give me a shot of whiskey or a shot of tequila. But that's not where this name comes from, because Don Guillermo also told me about the story, how in the old days, everybody knew in the village who the guy was that was making the Bacanora illegally. They just didn't tell the police, because they wanted to make sure to be able to get some Bacanora for themselves from time to time. But once a year, that person would make an offering to the village priest of his best lot of Bacanora. And the village priest in Spanish is called the padre, the father. And so, because if the padre blessed you, then you were covered by God. So you were protected.
You don't have to worry about the police.
Right.
You had God for me.
You had the God's
Police can go
insurance
away.
policy,
Yeah.
right? So this became known, that lot became known as El Trago del Padre, the shot of the Father.
Okay. That's the best story I've heard in a long damn time. What do we got here?
Well, this last one is our reposado. So, reposado, by law, has to be in barrel for 2 to 12 months. And this spent 9 months in barrel. These were barrels that I obtained from the Crittenden Distillery in Mississippi, a small distillery that does very nice work. And
So these are American white oak, and these carried American bourbon.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
So yeah, this is really spectacular. It's really, really tasty. So Bacanora is a very fresh, kind of sweet, flavorful taste to it, and there's no harshness like you would expect. A lot of people drinking have tasted, mezcals and tequilas that are just it's like drinking gasoline. It's just this high fire. Not at all with this. It's just a sweet, elegant, kind of grassy, natural, deserty flavor to it that's delightful. It's worth savoring. It really is. Wow. That's fabulous. And I've been drinking great whiskey all over the planet. And just as a straight spirit, I've got to give this major kudos.
In about 4 or 5 months, we'll be releasing an añejo version that will have spent 2 years in barrel. Añejo by law has to be at least 1 year in barrel in Mexico, and we'll do a organically farmed version and a wild version of that, and that will kind of round out our program for the time being. We're always thinking new and different things to do. And I'd love to see you down there and really show you how special this place, this desert, this barren land that makes such an unbelievable spirit is.
You know what? That's a fabulous idea, because I've been all over the cold parts of the planet. I would love to go to Mexico and spend some time where you're making this, because I love the American desert, and most of the American Texas desert is just half a river away from being the Mexican desert. So I love deserts. I spend a lot of time in deserts, and I may not bring my motorcycle, but I usually ride through deserts because they're just spectacular places. So I would love to come down and see how you make this, and see what, and watch for myself what's going on here.
Looking forward to welcoming you to Sonora, Mexico very soon.
All right, that sounds like a great spot for the Still Life Stories. Let's go down to Mexico.
Yeah, and you'll see the food, the people, the place. It's the reason why I'm there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you're making a great spirit, and here's a toast.
yeah.
Here's a toast to Bacanora.
Salud.
May the world discover this amazing stuff.
Yeah.